Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, my travels took me to the Battle of Chancellorsville, where I was double and triple checking facts for an upcoming story. I happened upon a newspaper report in the Richmond Times Dispatch about the death of Jackson, written only a week or published only a week after he passed. As I read the article, I quickly realized that it wasn't written by a Richmond reporter. It was written by a reporter in Washington, D.C., with the Washington Chronicle. And it's a mix of pleasure that he was no longer a threat to the Union Army and the Union cause, but also a healthy respect of his fighting qualities as a general and his qualities as a man. I checked some other newspapers and found similar reports, and they're different enough where I wanted to share a few with you here in this episode. So let me start with that first report to give you a sense of what I'm thinking about and what I'm seeing here. So this is the one from the Richmond Times Dispatch, May 18th, 1863, from the Washington Chronicle. Here's the excerpt. Stonewall Jackson is dead. While we are only too glad to be rid anyway of so terrible a foe, our sense of relief is not unmingled with emotions of sorrow and sympathy of so brave a man. Every man who possesses the slightest particle of magnanimity must admire the qualities for which Stonewall Jackson was celebrated. His heroism, his bravery, his sublime devotion, his purity of character. He is not the first instance of a good man devoting himself to a bad cause. Let us devoutly acknowledge the providence of God, who, while he soothes the accursed land with famine, and the people with madness, takes from their accursed cause its bravest, noblest, purest defender. Stonewall Jackson was a great general, a brave soldier, a noble Christian, and a pure man. May God throw these virtues against the sins of the secessionists, the advocate of a great national crime. So there's the Washington Chronicle on Stonewall Jackson. Here's another one from the Richmond Dispatch, published a day later on May 19th, 1863. And this excerpt comes from the New York Herald. Here we go. Quote, by intelligence we published yesterday from Richmond via Hooker's army on the Rappahannock, our readers have learned that the celebrated Stonewall Jackson died on Sunday last, partly from pneumonia and partly from the effects of amputation of his arm, rendered necessary by a wound he received in the battle on Sunday before. That's the Battle of Chancellorsville. The interment was to have taken place on Tuesday last. This event is a serious and irreplaceable loss to the rebel army, for it is agreed on all hands that Jackson was the most brilliant rebel general developed by this war. From his coolness and sagacity, rapid movements and stubbornness in the fight, and his invariable good fortune, he resembled Napoleon in his early career more than does any other general of modern times. According to the estimate formed of him by the Richmond Enquirer, the special organ of Jefferson Davis, the loss is greater to the rebels than if they had lost a whole division of their army. Their victory at Chancellorsville is therefore dearly bought. To him was largely due the victory at the first fight of Bull Run. Here he received his nickname of Stonewall from the firmness with which he and his regiment fought. His raid through the valley of the Shenandoah was a masterly stroke of strategy. For a while, he kept McDowell's and Banks's corps employed and struck terror at Washington by a rapid retrograde movement. He appeared on the battlefield in the 7 days fight on the Chickahominy to turn the scale just at the critical moment. Wallace McDowell was non-est like Patterson at Bull Run. Again, when Pope was retreating from the Rapidan and the Rappahannock, Jackson, by forced marches, gained his flank, caused terrible confusion, and obtained vast spoil. Lastly, at the Battle of Antietam, after capturing Harper's Ferry, he turned upon the right flank of our army in time to repulse Hooker, save the remnant of Lee's force, and prevent the battle from becoming a rout. Wherever Jackson appeared on any field, victory seems to have perched upon his banners. In his demeanor, he is represented as having been extremely quiet and modest, plain and ostentatious in his dress, silent and thoughtful in his habits, temperate in his conduct, strictly moral, and in religion he is said to have been almost a fanatic. He was a universal favorite in the rebel armies and popular even in our own. Over his men, he exercised the strictest discipline and always moved them with the least possible quantity of baggage. Hence his rapid marches and the sobriquet by which his troops were known, foot cavalry. What is curious about the manner of his wound is that, according to the Richmond Enquirer, he was shot by some of his own men, which is very probable in the smoke and confusion of so terrible a battle, with perhaps one part of his line more advanced than another, and as he was generally in the front of the fight. His death is no doubt owing less to the wound than to his exposure in the rainstorm, and by continuing in command in such a condition, superinducing pneumonia and a fatal termination. So that's the May 18th report. I've got one more to share, and this one comes to us from the Abingdon Virginian on May 29th, 1863, and involves one of Jackson's foemen, General George B. McClellan, the commander of the Army of the Potomac. This particular story is headlined, General McClellan Waited On by the City Council of Washington. And the subhead is what he says of General Stonewall Jackson. So here we go. The rumor that General McClellan had resigned and another that he had again been assigned to command of the Army of the Potomac have both proved untrue. In a conversation with the committee on the occasion of the presentation of the complimentary resolutions by a delegation from the Washington City Council, General McClellan expressed himself much grieved at the death of Stonewall Jackson and said of him, quote, "No one can help admiring a man like Jackson. He was sincere and true and valiant, yet no one has disappointed me more than he has. Jackson was one of my classmates and at college never promised to be the man he has proved himself. He was always very slow and acquired a lesson only after great labor. And yet his determination was so great that he never gave anything up until he succeeded. His character seems to have changed since, for he has exhibited a great celerity in all his movements while in command of rebel forces. Lee is perhaps the most able executive officer." So there you have some reflections coming from Northern reports published in Southern newspapers in the weeks following the death of Stonewall Jackson following the Battle of Chancellorsville. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.